Welcome to The Point with Ana Kasparian. I'm your host, and this week the show is a little more serious than it was last week. If you guys can remember, last week we talked about EDM culture and what it's like to go to these music festivals. Well, this week we have some pretty heavy-duty topics that I'm excited to talk to you guys about. Our lengthy discussion will have to do with political ideology and whether or not political ideology is genetic. There's some really fascinating data on that. We're also going to talk about Elizabeth Warren versus Hillary Clinton. Are we going to speculate on 2016? No, not really. But we are going to talk about how Elizabeth Warren is better than Hillary Clinton in many different ways, and how Third Way, a think tank, is going after Elizabeth Warren in the worst possible way. And then we're going to talk about how police are spying on us too. We got government agencies, and now we have law enforcement. Everyone's spying on us. And finally, we'll end our show with a discussion on the knockout game. This game where these kids supposedly go up to people and they knock them out with a single punch. Is this really some sort of epidemic that we're dealing with in the country, or is it something that's being sensationalized in the media? But before we get to all of that, and before we meet our panelists, I want to go to today's No Filter, which has to do with Uruguay legalizing marijuana in their country. In July 2013, the lower house in Uruguay legalized marijuana. The bill went to the Senate, and just recently, the Senate in Uruguay has decided to pass the legislation. The only thing left to do in the country is to ensure that President Jose Mujica is going to sign the legislation into law. And he has been on the record indicating that he is very supportive of this law. So basically, Uruguay will be one of the first countries that legalizes marijuana for all use. People will be able to buy the marijuana from pharmacies for a very low price, and they will be able to grow their own marijuana plants. Now, of course, there are caveats to stories like this. It's not going to be like the Wild West where people go crazy and smoke as much weed as they want. They will have a limited amount of marijuana that they can purchase, about 40 grams per month. Now, if you know anything about marijuana, 40 grams is an insane amount of marijuana. That's more than enough for people to smoke, and if they decide they want to grow it themselves, they can have up to 6 plants. Now, there's something really courageous about what politicians in Uruguay did. You have to keep in mind that polls indicate that 2/3 of the population in the country are actually against the government legalizing marijuana. But Jose Mujica said that he absolutely did not care. He actually wants to lower the amount of people who are smoking marijuana, and one of the only ways to do that is to legalize it and regulate it. In fact, they've already launched a campaign, an educational campaign, letting people know that smoking marijuana might actually do some damage to your body. Now, of course, I would like to look into those ads and see whether or not they're actually legitimate, but I do like the fact that they are using the same type of policy that we used here in the United States when it came to tobacco. When it came to tobacco, we didn't make it illegal, we didn't ban it, but we educated people about it. And as a result, less people smoked tobacco, less people smoked cigarettes, I should say. Now, I wish we could do something similar here in the United States. Right now, we have 2 states, Colorado and Washington, that legalized marijuana for recreational use. New York might actually be the 3rd state. However, something needs to be done on a federal level. And one of the reasons why nothing is done on a federal level, of course, is because people make money off the war on drugs. And then we have idiots like Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly was talking about Colorado and how the Denver Post has hired a pot editor. He had a huge problem with this, and here's what he had to say.
The new marijuana editor recently appeared on TV.
Are you high right now?
I am definitely not high.
Are you
right
sure?
now.
So you're not high now, but do you smoke pot at all?
I don't smoke pot. I do eat it, though.
Oh, okay. Oh.
This is what's going to happen in the Denver Post. They're going to tell you what the best bud is. I feel like Spicoli.
It sounds like it's much more than that.
Okay, they're going to tell you what the best bud is, where to buy it, how to prune it, how to roll it. This is promoting the use of an intoxicant by the Denver Post. Why don't you just set it up like, here's the bar in Denver where you can get the cheapest chasers and the most gin for your money. This is exactly what it is, Mary Catherine.
Now, I find it hilarious that that commentary is coming from the man who is known as the Falafel King. I've coined that phrase for him because he literally got so drunk one night that he called one of his female producers and started saying sexual things to her. And at one point he was talking about taking a loofah and rubbing it up against her body, and then he forgot the name of a loofah, so he decided to say falafel instead. That's how drunk that guy was. And he's talking to us about intoxication. Really? Obviously, there's a double standard that exists between marijuana and alcohol, and I think it's an absolutely ridiculous double standard. But I can't wait for minds like Bill O'Reilly's to change. We're not going to change Bill O'Reilly's mind, but I do like the fact that younger generations are realizing that this war on marijuana and this war on drugs in general has not been effective. It has been disastrous to the lives of many Americans, and as a result, we need to have common sense policy to attack this issue. And if you really care about helping people who are addicted to drugs, the worst way to solve the problem is to arrest them, throw them in a prison with violent criminals, and then have them turn into hardened criminals themselves. Anyway, I thought that it was really fascinating to see the kind of reaction that someone like Bill O'Reilly would have, but I also love the fact that more and more states are getting on board with legalizing marijuana, and hopefully one day, when we get the money out of politics and people stop making money off the war on drugs, we will do something on a federal level. All right, with that said, now let's meet our panelists for today's episode of The Point. Avi Tuschman holds a PhD in evolutionary anthropology from Stanford and is the author of the recently published Our Political Nature, The Evolutionary Origins of What Divides Us. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you, Anna.
Kelly Carlin is a fixture on the Point panels, but also occasionally squeezes in time to host the Kelly Carlin Show on SiriusXM. Kelly also recently inked a publishing deal to write a memoir based on her own one-woman show, A Carlin Home Companion. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yes. Lee Camp is a comedian, political satirist, and partner of the Young Turks YouTube network, and also hosts the wildly popular Moment of Clarity web series.
Good to be here.
Thank you for coming on. We love having you back. All right, so let's move on to our very first topic, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about this. It turns out that our political beliefs might not be the result of our environment. It might actually have a little bit to do with genetics. Let's take a look.
A British study has revealed that conservatives' brains have larger amygdalas than the brains of liberals.
Amygdalas are responsible for fear and other primitive emotions, which could explain why Republicans here in the US are more susceptible to fear-mongering terror alerts than Democrats.
At the same time, conservatives' brains were also found to have a smaller anterior cingulate, the part of the brain responsible for courage and optimism, which is probably why liberals are generally more hopeful and willing to take on big, tough challenges like healthcare reform.
That's really interesting, especially when you look at the structure of our brains and how a Republican differs from a Democrat, how a liberal differs from a conservative. And Avi, you've actually written an entire book about this topic, how our genetics play a role in our political beliefs and our views. How much legitimacy is there behind videos like the one that we just watched? Is this just liberal propaganda? Because it seems very nice to liberals, right? Or is there actual legitimacy behind it?
Well, I would caution against a sort of partisan triumphalism when we look at these findings, or using words like hardwired. In fact, study after study has shown that approximately 50% of the variance in our political attitudes comes from genetic differences between individuals, and the other half comes from the environment.
So talk a little bit about the Pew Research study on twins. I thought that that was so interesting because they looked at identical twins and they looked at fraternal twins. And of course, there's a difference between the two. And they realized that if you are identical twins, you are more likely to hold the same political beliefs. But if you're fraternal twins, that means that you're not identical, that you might differ in your political beliefs, right? And of course, you're raised in the same environment. So in that case, the one thing that's different is your genetics. So can you talk about that a little more?
Absolutely. This is an important study. It's replicated earlier findings that go back several decades. And study after study has found that a very important component of this variance in our political beliefs does have this genetic origin. And you know, it's funny, there's a bit of a difference between liberals and conservatives in the way that people look at what comes from nature versus nurture, which is a problematic thing. But some political psychologists like John Hibbing, Kevin Smith, and John Alford recently pointed out there's a funny hypocrisy, which is that liberals are more likely to look at the sources of these social attitudes or attributes coming from the environment, but they'll make an important exception, which is for sexual orientation, which they insist is genetic. However, conservatives are more likely to say that sexual orientation is a choice. Not all, but many of them. However, when it comes to a trait like intelligence, they'll say this has a genetic cause, right? But liberals say, no, that all comes from the environment. So it turns out that our perceptions of these things aren't necessarily the best tool to understand or to study human bias
well,
itself.
And it sounds like we're feeding our own bias, like whatever we're picking and choosing depending on what we want to support in our worldview and our political beliefs.
Yeah, I mean it's really fascinating stuff. I love that you pointed out that hypocrisy. And Kelly, when you consider the fact that genetics do play a role in our political beliefs, is there any hope in lessening this polarized environment that we have right now, where people are so firm in their beliefs that they're unwilling to work together to come to some sort of compromise in government?
Well, I mean, we've been able to compromise before as humans, and if this is a biological basis, humans have been around for a while in this kind of biological shape that we're in. So there is potential for it, but I do find it interesting that there is this kind of this immediate filtering of information through these different parts of the brain. And I think, as with anything, I think both of these things are important. I think we have to be in somewhat, fear-based to make sure we're safe and secure, and at the same time have to acknowledge that connection is important also for humans. So, this is the problem these days, is that we're not accepting that the other side might have something good and important that actually supports what we're all trying to do here. I mean, that's what it always comes down to. So, but my fear is that if the brain thing is used too much, that then they'll probe our brains and want to change them.
Yeah,
I mean, on some like crazy dystopic, kind of point of view.
A lot of Americans deserve lobotomies, let's be honest.
Yeah, or I've already had them, maybe.
Fair point.
If only.
Yeah. So Lee, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, the whole nature versus nurture argument. Do you think that, considering the fact that our brains play a role and our genetics play a role, is it possible for us to actually accept information and change our political beliefs based on what's in our environment, or based on logic as opposed to our genetics?
Yeah, and it depends on how it's presented to people. I mean, in my case, I think I came by my politics more because of nature, because I was molested by the Westboro Baptist Church when I was little. But, it could be a lot. It was a joke. Okay. It's all right. You look really nervous, Anna. It's going to be all right. We're going to get through this.
I did look
hang in there.
Oh my God. We need to stop and console him for a little bit. Yes.
No, but what Kelly was saying about, the other side may have some points or whatever. Also, I think it's not always talking about sides. We do such a good job of being like, it's this team and this team. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of gray area there where, if we look at it issue by issue, people don't have to be on one team or the other.
Yeah. That's true. That's absolutely true. I mean, what do you guys think about your own political beliefs, right? So I consider myself a progressive, but I also would like to believe, and of course I'm being very, very nice to myself here, that if I'm presented with new information that goes against my beliefs, I will be willing to change my belief. Mm-hmm. So one example of that was my thoughts on prostitution. So originally I was against legalizing prostitution. Then I heard arguments about why it's better to legalize and regulate it, and then I changed my views, right? And it's all based on logic and the information that's presented to me. I mean, is that what we can expect from the majority of Americans, or do genetic factors kind of take charge, and we don't see that kind of open-mindedness?
Well, your ability to think about a problem and arrive at a different conclusion is definitely admirable. Studies have shown that when you look at large groups of people, and of course we're always thinking probabilistically when we get into this kind of social science research, but people even do basic arithmetic incorrectly if it goes against their predispositions politically.
Amazing. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll...
yeah, we are.
Yeah, so it is worrisome, and sometimes they'll even dig in deeper into their initial position when they're presented with with information that might go against their candidate.
I mean, this was a big change that happened, back in the early 1900s or 1950s when they realized, stop giving people facts and expecting them to come to a solution, to an answer you want them to come to. Instead, manipulate them with fear and whatever advertisers do, tell you you're fat and lonely and you need the solution from that product. So the people coming up with these things have realized a long time ago, don't give people the facts and expect them to figure it out.
Yeah, and we see a huge issue with the way our media is run right now and some of the propaganda that we see in the mainstream. But I feel like if people are cognizant of our predispositions, they'll be more willing to accept new information as it comes to them. I think part of the problem is people don't like to admit that they're wrong, right? A lot of us have opinions or thoughts or beliefs that are just wrong based on the facts that are presented to us. And it's difficult to take in this new information, accept it as reality or fact, and come to a different conclusion in a public way. So we kind of have to change the mindset when it comes to that as well.
Well, and it's so interesting you bring that up, because I've always thought about, you know, like America needs marriage counseling is what they need. And the thing, when I was a therapist, you would sit a couple down, people would rather be right than try to work out a solution. And that is maddening. And that's, you know, that kind of stubbornness and need to own our position so much, you know, is what I always think will be the downfall of a marriage or of a country. You know, I mean, that's when civil war occurs. I'd rather be right than work this out. And that it seems like we're getting more and more entrenched in that. Although, you know, it's interesting. I was just reading in the paper this morning about Paul Ryan working out this budget deal. You know, and he's learning that if he wants to have real leadership, he needs to show he can compromise. You know, so I'm finding, oh, well, this is interesting. So he's learning to have to move towards something, you know. So I don't know, but of course he's a great political animal, so, you know, his ambition.
I definitely agree that a real politician, a real leader has to learn the art of compromise, but unfortunately it's gotten to a point where compromise and concession has been looked upon as some sort of weakness.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So we kind of have to change the thoughts on that. But I think that this is so interesting. I mean, just to know that the way you were born, the genes that you have can actually make you a certain way, politically minded.
We're apes
We
at
are.
the heart of it.
We are.
But he's also saying, you know, I mean, Avi said that 50% of it too is this
Your
other
environment.
aspect, you know, and I think that's where values come in. You know, what do you value? What's important to you? And I was thinking a lot about like the difference between the value of liberty versus justice, you know, which is generally a right-left thing they say. For most issues, and then certain issues come up and that completely switches, you know. So the values are an important part of this, and I'm sure there's some part of the brain that's feeding my value system.
And in some of the most important issues, it's not in us, it's not in our genetics, like the century of the self. I mean, that took billions, trillions of dollars of advertising and media to tell us we should want and need and be selfish and be alone and want it all for ourselves. Like, it took a lot to get us to where we are now. So I don't think that's in our genetics.
So Avi, one final question about the legitimacy of this research, because I always like to question the methodology of these studies. And from what you've seen, would you say that the way these studies are conducted, is it scientifically sound? Is the methodology correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, you have to be careful what study you look at and who's describing it. But I've spent the last 10 years carefully collecting the cutting-edge insights from fields like neuroscience, primatology, and genetics from the top, most prestigious peer-reviewed scientific journals. And other people who've been working on this problem have also come to surprisingly similar conclusions. And so there's a pretty high degree of consensus. And yeah, it's very fascinating research. And in fact, I'm optimistic, Anna, because when people start to learn about the evolutionary logic of our political predispositions, when you take that step back, which most people haven't done, something changes. And this is so critical because the more education people have and the more interested we are in politics, both of these factors have a polarizing effect on our dispositions, which means liberals get even more liberal and conservatives get more conservative.
So education really isn't the answer.
It's amazing, but
it's a problem.
But here's another problem, though. Okay, we see so many conservative pundits and also political leaders that are Republican that just straight out refuse to believe the science.
I was going to bring that up.
They
Absolutely.
don't believe the science.
Yeah.
So if they are made aware of these predispositions, I feel like they will just say that, no, the science is not sound. We don't believe in this. I mean, you have a group of people in the country that just deny that evolution exists, which is absurd. So how are you going to have a conversation with them about something as complex as genetics playing a role in your political beliefs?
Right, or this study telling me if I'm a conservative, oh, you're just triggering my fear factor inside of me, and you know, and then I'm just your monkey or something, your toy or something, you know, like that. They're not going to admit to that. Like, no, I have my own thoughts. I have my own beliefs about this. So yeah, I don't know how far the research is going to go to actually solve our political problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another reason why I'm optimistic is because if you look at an issue like gay marriage, for example, which incidentally polarizes political spectrums all over the world in the same direction, which shows that there are universal elements in the structure of our political orientation. But if you look at that over time, at people's approval of an issue like gay marriage, and then you ask them, do you think this is sexual orientation is something that comes from our biology, or is it a personal choice? And the fewer people say that it's a personal choice, and the more they're saying this is an innate disposition, the approval for issues like gay marriage goes up exactly in the same parallel way. They follow the same chart. So I think the more that we understand that our political dispositions are something that we're born with, and not that our adversaries have some kind of agenda, or they're ignorant, or if they only had the right information, or if we could only convince everyone of something, even if it's evolution, which I agree with, but I know there are people who don't, and sometimes it's frustrating. But you know, we're not just at the edge of some kind of utopia.
Right.
And thinking like that is dangerous. It feels good to think about that right now, but in the long run, these misconceptions of human nature have negative effects, and we have unrealistic expectations. And it is also possible to learn to think in other political directions, almost like acquiring a new language. And I found that while I'm doing this work and trying to look for years and years at this problem as if I were a biologist visiting from another planet and measuring the personalities of this Homo sapiens and how they're affecting their political behavior, this has created much deeper understandings and created more political moderation for me, and I think greater peace of mind, and that's what I'm really hoping to share with people in our political nature.
Very interesting stuff. Thank you for talking about the science a little bit. Really, really great. Unfortunately, we got to wrap up this segment, but when we come back, we're going to talk about Third Way, political think tank attacking Senator Warren, and whether or not she would be a better president than Hillary Clinton. Stick around. Welcome back to The Point with Ana Kasparian. One of my least favorite things to talk about is the horse race. Okay, we're in 2014. Well, we're not even in 2014 yet. I'm kind of ahead of myself.
You're doing it now.
I know, I'm ahead of myself, right? We haven't even started the midterm elections, and people are already talking about 2016, which drives me absolutely fucking insane. Can we focus on the policy issues that actually make a difference in America right now? But a lot of people have been talking about Senator Elizabeth Warren and her possible run for president in 2016. Now, I find that fascinating because she's someone that I definitely support. I didn't want to speculate about her running. However, Third Way, which is a Democratic think tank, which is very apologetic to corporations and Wall Street, wrote a very, very nasty blog about her on the Wall Street Journal. So I'm very curious to see what the panel thinks about it, but before we get to the topic, I want you to watch this video very quickly.
With fundraising and speaking engagements from coast to coast, Hillary Clinton continues to dominate the 2016 presidential speculation.
Thank you.
Apologetic liberal who could stir things up.
You don't get anything you don't fight for. But if you fight, you got a chance to win.
First-term Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren.
I don't want to go to the United States Senate to be there for women some of the time. I want to go to the United States Senate to be there for women all of the time.
She's another fast-rising star who could make history and might threaten a Clinton Democratic coronation if they both run for the White House 3 years from now.
All right, so there's some speculation for you there. I love Elizabeth Warren. I've been very supportive of her. She has been very, very tough on Wall Street. If anyone were to pass regulation of Wall Street or the big banks, it would be Elizabeth Warren. And just to give you a very small example of a proposal that she made just last year, she wanted to lower the interest rate for federal student loans to 0.75%. The reason why she wanted to do that was because whenever the banks borrow money from the United States government and from the taxpayers, that's their interest rate, 0.75%. Do you want to know what the interest rate is on federal student loans at this moment? 3.86%. Okay, so Elizabeth Warren is actually looking out for the little guy, which I absolutely love. But now the question is, would Elizabeth Warren be a better president than Hillary Clinton would be? Now, Third Way, as I mentioned earlier on, wrote this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal where they were just totally criticizing her because she has the audacity to try to expand government programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. These are programs that are very popular in the United States. If you poll Americans, they say that they love it, and they're they're willing to pay higher payroll taxes just to expand these government programs, right? At the same time, Hillary Clinton's a little different, okay? So let's bring in the panelists, even though I've already said quite a bit about this topic. Kelly, what do you think about Elizabeth Warren? Are you on board? And don't be afraid to piss me off, because if you are not on board, I'm totally open to it. Go ahead.
She's a total rock star.
Thank you.
I love her. I love her courage. I love her ability to speak truth to power. I love the fact that she got elected by speaking truth to power, of course in a very progressive state.
Yes.
But she's there and she's rabble-rousing and she's bringing up important points of view and issues that it seems that in the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, it feels like, in some way, have just kind of gone to the side. We've all just, been coming more and more towards the middle as Democrats and as people on the left in Washington. And she's someone who's, kind of pulling the rubber band back and saying, no, these are important issues and someone needs to speak up for the little guy. So I love her.
Right, absolutely. And with the ravaging, the ransacking of the country that's going on Wall Street, this should be the entire Democratic Party that's speaking like she is, but it's not. She is this small glimmer of light. And let's also just say that the CNN story right there is complete and utter bullshit. Like, she has already said she supports Hillary Clinton for the presidential nomination, so they're just trying to trump up some ridiculous story that's not actually there. Now, it'd be great if all the Democrats were like Warren, but they're not, because when you don't have Wall Street's back, you don't usually make it to senator either.
Yeah, that's true. But doesn't that point out a real injustice and a real problem in politics today? Avi, why don't you jump in? I mean, what do you think about the fact that Democrats, the people that keep saying, when they campaign, they say that they're going to regulate Wall Street, and they're going to do something to break up the big banks and make them smaller, right? So they're not too big to fail. Why is it that they campaign that way, and then as soon as they get elected into office, they renege on their promises?
Well, there are a number of reasons, and basically I agree with Kelly and Lee and you that Elizabeth Warren is bringing up some very important issues that we should probably be discussing more as a country, and she may be successful in drawing more attention to them and in reframing them, and if she were to decide to run for the presidency, she'd certainly cause quite a bit of trouble for Hillary.
Definitely would. How much would Hillary hate that, by the way? First time around, this unknown senator comes in and he like snatches up the election, or the primary and then the election. Yeah. And then second time around, Elizabeth Warren, if she were to run, which as Lee mentioned perfectly, she's probably not going to, but it would be so hilarious to see that happen to her second time around.
Yeah. However, I do think that she would not be a viable candidate at the national level.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, there are two reasons, or several actually. As you mentioned, there is a money issue, but people sometimes get overly cynical about politics, and they think that just being able to outspend your rival guarantees a victory. And as we have seen before, that's not at all true. There are actually important forces in public opinion.
80%, most money wins 80% of the time in the Senate, 93% of the time in the House. It is almost always. I mean, that is a lot of the time, all right? So the person with the most money is running away with these elections.
And Avi is right about the fact that Elizabeth Warren probably would not get the backing of corporations, and as a result, she wouldn't raise as much money as someone like Hillary Clinton would. Right. So go ahead.
But also there's forces in public opinion. New York Times columnist Tom Edsall wrote today or yesterday that when times get tough in America specifically, support for redistributive policies actually goes down. And this is something we see in countries around the world. When people are under economic pressure, they tend to polarize, but in the direction of their predisposition. So
why is that?
Well, the reason is because when people feel like they don't have as much personal control over their lives, they're more likely to look for a strong political authority to kind of fix the problem. But it's really their personality differences that determine whether that authority would be on the left or the right. So after the fallout from the 2008 financial crisis, we saw our political spectrum expand on both ends with the Occupy and the Tea Party movements. I think it may be that the US political spectrum is a bit skewed to the right.
Definitely.
So,
definitely.
So when people do polarize, the support for redistribution goes down. And this ties into one of the three measurable clusters of personality traits that I talk about in Our Political Nature, which has to do with tolerance toward inequality. And it has actually very little at all to do with your income bracket.
But even calling it redistribution, I mean, I'm wondering about these polls you're talking about, because calling it redistribution, how about just a living wage? You know, that's, yeah, redistribution sounds bad. A living wage sounds quite good. So it depends on the way you talk about these things. These are words created in right-wing think tanks.
Yeah, that's a good point. The way you frame the questions, that plays a huge role in the way that respondents react. You know, whenever people are getting polled on the Affordable Care Act, once they hear Affordable Care Act, they'll say that they're in favor of it.
Yeah.
Once they hear Obamacare, the same people will say that they're against it, even though it is the same policy.
Yeah, Kimmel did a great thing where he showed the two people saying, "Oh, I like the Affordable Care Act. I hate Obamacare."
Yeah.
Well, and the language of this, I think, is so important, because one of the things I noticed from the clip was they used unapologetic to describe her. Do they use unapologetic when they talk about people on the right in the Tea Party who are making a stance for themselves? I'm just really curious about how the media uses that word, because it's a really slippery little word there. It's like there's a defiance to the left or something that's not happening on the right.
Remember, Hillary Clinton was described as shrill when she was running in the primaries. And even though I was supportive of Obama in the primaries, I still thought that that was not an appropriate word to describe her. So yeah, you do see a lot of that, you know, you see those slants in the media, and I think it does play a role in, you know, public perception. But I guess we'll see what happens. Unfortunately, I don't think Elizabeth Warren is going to run, but regardless of who runs, the one topic, and I think we can all agree on this, is we got to get the money out of politics, because if we don't, then the money will always influence our political system, the policies that get proposed, and the policies that get passed. All right, now with that said, let's move on to surveillance. We all know that the government is spying on us. The NSA is looking into everything that we do, including the porn that we watch, but it turns out that law enforcement is doing the same. Take a look.
Now to a startling report on how law enforcement may be tracking you. USA Today reports that the National Security Agency isn't the only government entity secretly collecting data from cell phones. Police are using some of the same methods. According to the report, police now have mobile devices that can tap into cell phone data in real time and capture information about thousands of cell phone users at once. That report is based on records from more than 125 police agencies across the U.S.
Now, an important thing to keep in mind when it comes to these telecommunications companies is that they actually make a killing off of giving this information to law enforcement, because they can charge police officers fees. So just to give you a very specific example, in 2012, these companies made a total of $26 million, okay? So they don't give a shit about a warrant. You think they care about that if they're looking at their bottom line and looking at how many millions of dollars they can make off of giving this information to them? So that is a huge problem. But of course, it always goes back to our Fourth Amendment and how we just continue to destroy it and pretend as if it doesn't exist. Let me read the Fourth Amendment to you guys. I love the Fourth Amendment. I like my privacy. I think everyone should know about that. It's the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Why have we forgotten about that, and why is it that law enforcement and the NSA can indiscriminately collect information on us? It drives me absolutely crazy. Let's open it up to the panel. Lee, what do you think?
First of all, I think they mean seizures as in shaking, and really, you shouldn't be subjected to unreasonable seizures, I think. So that may be part of it. No, I'm fine with them listening to my phone call, because they're not going to know when I'm pressing my junk against the phone. They're not. They're going to look at the transcript and be like, I don't know, 19 minutes of silence, and then he said thank you. So I think that's fine. No, of course, people should be up in arms about this. People should be furious, whether it's local level or whether it's the NSA. People should be furious about it, and we've given away. It's like, how long can they wipe their ass with the Constitution before it's no longer a usable document? You know, at some point it's going to stink so much you just got to admit that we're not using it anymore. It's utterly insane, and people should be furious about it.
Where's our Tea Party friends on this? They're all up. They got constitutions framed in all their living rooms.
Because the Koch brothers aren't funding them on this point.
Oh, right. So maybe it'll take the Koch brothers to be tapped, their phones to be tapped, for them to make an issue about the Constitution finally. Maybe it's going to take a billionaire to be pissed off about this. It's just, it is, I mean, when you read that, it's like, how? I mean, it's right there.
It's gotten so bad, and I question whether or not we'll ever get to a point where we can like roll all of this damage back. Can we get to a point where we actually do value the Fourth Amendment and we stop spying on people and collecting information on them indiscriminately? That's my real problem. If you want to come at me and say, hey, you know what, I'm a police officer, I have a warrant, I believe that this person is involved in sex trafficking and there's probable cause here, right? That's completely different from what they're doing right now. They have certain technology, I apologize, they have certain technology like Stingray technology. It allows police to tap into cell phone data in real time by mimicking a mobile cell phone tower. Okay, so they have all of this advanced technology, so in some cases, they don't even have to go to a telecommunications company. They don't have to go to Verizon or Sprint or AT&T. Avi.
I'd like to go back to the last point you made, Anna, which is about the warrant, and I completely agree with you there. We're in an information age and in an information arms race, which is happening between different levels of individual and corporation and even between countries. And so I think there are two very important conversations that we need to have. The first is, to what extent should different actors be able to go into the information, the data worlds of others? And that's an issue that's traditionally divided liberals and conservatives, and we need to keep having that. But the second point is one I'd really like to emphasize, which is whatever agreement we eventually come to, for me personally, I think respecting the rule of law and the Constitution and having a process set up so that we're not going around the legal framework and the right way that things should be done to protect and balance individual freedoms against collective interests. That's really crucial.
You know, the real problem is we don't have a powerful lobby that is trying to contain, or not contain, but to support and maintain our Fourth Amendment. So just an example, when it comes to the Second Amendment, if you ever talk about common sense gun regulation, I'm not even talking about banning guns. I'm against banning guns. But I'm talking about, hey, why don't we limit the amount of magazines people can buy? How about something like that, right? You get these powerful lobbies like the NRA that come in and they're like, no, we got to protect our Second Amendment. If you actually give a crap about the Constitution, why isn't the NRA coming out and saying, hey, you know what, our privacy is being violated? And these are the same people that think that we need to bear arms to protect ourselves from the government, right? Why don't we protect ourselves from the government in this case?
You know what, it's so interesting because I was just thinking about like the cultural conversation around privacy, you know, and it, you know, I think about like the late 70s when Phil Donahue started having confessional television, and we've become a confessional society, so there really is no privacy. I have a solo show, I go on, I tell about my life, you know, there's reality shows, there's tell-alls, there's Oprah Winfrey, we're tweeting that, you know, we're peeing right now, you know, I mean, all of that's going on. So I
retweeted that.
Thank you. I got a lot of retweets on that. And so I think our own personal relationship with privacy is changing, and we're not really understanding the importance of this law and order aspect to it, and that we're giving people who have power to put you in a small hole in the ground for the rest of your life if they really want to. If they decide they can twist who you are, we're not getting that yet in this culture, because right now we're all about sharing it. So I think there's going to be some backlash possibly around this culturally.
And I think a lot of people on the left seem okay with it right now because Obama's in office.
Yes.
And you're like, look, let's pretend, just for the sake of argument, that he's a fucking saint, all right? What happens when the next guy, when the tyrant does get into office, and he's got the largest surveillance infrastructure ever created for mankind, just added a dictator's toolkit ready to be used? I mean, doesn't that frighten anyone?
I guess it doesn't. I mean, you don't see very much pushback against these types of policies, and it worries me, because the issue at hand is our democratic process. And I always make this argument, but it's true. I mean, in order for a democracy to work, you have to have political activism. And would people be comfortable being politically active if they know that the government that they're holding accountable is collecting all of this private information on them, and they can use that information to intimidate them or discredit them? And it is not far-fetched for that to happen. There are 6 Muslims abroad right now, one of which might be a U.S. citizen, that the government has been spying on, collecting all this information on them because they believe that they're radicalizers, even though none of them have been involved in any terror plot. And what they want to do is they want to take their sexual activity or whatever porn they're watching and use that to discredit them in the media, right? They'll do the same thing to Americans. In fact, I'm sure that they already have. So that is the real problem at hand here. All right.
The weird thing is that would make me a bigger fan of them. I'd be like, oh, you're into the foot fetish stuff too? Sweet.
I know. Well, we're open-minded individuals, right?
We had something in common with a Muslim radical.
We have a huge chunk of the country that wouldn't be so cool with that.
Yeah.
So it's a little unfortunate. But anyway, we got to take one more quick break. Let's do that. And when we come back, we're going to talk about this so-called knockout game. Is it really as big of a deal as people are making it out to be in the press? Welcome back to The Point with Ana Kasparian. Are you afraid of being a victim of random violence? Well, the media says that you should be. Take a look.
Sickening game playing out on the streets of cities across America with dangerous results.
Criminals taking aim at innocent victims, aiming to knock them out with a sucker punch. Lawmakers and civil rights leaders with a new push this morning to try to stop this disturbing behavior before somebody else gets hurt or even killed. ABC's Rob Nelson is here with details. Rob, good morning.
Good morning, guys. This is tough to watch. It is known as the knockout game, a violent national trend often caught on video that is downright disturbing to watch, hitting major cities across the country. This twisted game has authorities on high alert and its victims left stunned and sometimes badly injured.
All right, that was a shocking video. I always find it interesting when they feel that something terrible is happening, but then they'll show the same video over and over and over again.
Traumatize people.
And they traumatize people. I think that there's a lot of fear-mongering. I'm not trying to say that this isn't a problem and that we shouldn't do something about it, but they keep saying trend. But what does that mean? Can you please provide some numbers? I mean, you act as if this is some sort of epidemic. I want to know how often it happens, where it happens, why it happens. So let me open it up to the panel. Lee, what do you think? Are you worried about the knockout game?
Terrified. Yeah, I mean, it's a bullshit story. It's not, it's happened 4 times. But I am a big supporter of it, though, because I think we have too much security in this country, and I think people need to be more afraid. And I think life, no, but literally, though, life is weird, and we can't be protected from everything. You can't cover your kid in Purell 24/7. Life doesn't happen behind plexiglass. I don't think you can protect from every goddamn thing that happens. Oh, let's put padding on every sharp corner around the world.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate a little bit, because I mean you do see this happen time to time. I don't know how often it is. I'm not going to call it a trend until I actually see numbers in front of me. But to know that people get enjoyment out of going around New York and sucker punching someone to the point where they knock out, they're unconscious. That is scary, scary stuff. I mean, I'm worried about it, like not to the point where I think it's going to happen to me, but I'm worried about how people think that if they do this type of behavior and if they put it on video, they're somehow going to become famous. There's like this obsession with going viral online.
I'm guessing adolescent boys are doing this. This is a typical tribal gang, my penis is bigger than yours type of thing. It's about proving yourself to your peers, and I think it's
not all school teachers, female school teachers. I thought it was.
Well,
they were
just
the ones.
The one.
Yeah,
just the one. But the kid deserved it. So I'm thinking this has pretty much been going on since the beginning of humans in one form or another. And yes, it is terrifying to think about someone just coming up and sucker punching you. But I grew up in LA.
Cavemen, they would draw it as they were doing it.
Or they would hit you with a stick. But I grew up in in LA here during the gang wars, and I used to, the fear mongering of the local news was, drive-by shootings, you're going to be shot on the 405, and yes, it happens, and it happens every once in a while, but I see this as a very trend. It's a trend because 4 people in the media have talked about it.
Right. It's a trend because 4 people in the media have footage of it,
yes.
and it does really, really well with ratings, and they can play it over and over again and pretend like this is some really big problem that's happening every single day in America in every single city. Avi, what are your thoughts? Is this something that could possibly have anything to do with race? Because I'm seeing a lot of pundits in the media talking about how, oh, this is black on white violence. A lot of the perpetrators here are black. A lot of the victims are white. In some cases, the victims are also Jewish, and some believe that anti-Semitism might play a role in these knockout games.
So the controversial thing about this trend is not whether it's sick and wrong to knock somebody out on the street who you don't know. Mm-hmm. The big controversy here is whether or not this is a trend. And this gets at an issue which is perceptions of human nature, mm-hmm. which is another one of those underlying clusters of personality traits that I discuss in our political nature that separates people on the left and the right in political spectrums all around the world. And people who are on the left tend to have a more rosy view of human nature as being more cooperative, and people on the right, because of that larger right amygdala and some other features of their physiology, tend to be more attuned to danger. And so that's what's controversial here. I think it's wonderful that you're asking about statistics and trends, because to be scientific, we really should know what's going on. And the other issue is this an instance of communal violence, or is it a hate crime? Should it be prosecuted differently? I think if there's evidence that this is a hate crime, it should be prosecuted in a different way. It wouldn't surprise me if it were, because when you look at statistics in Europe and the United States of some of these crimes, they do seem to be on the rise. But it's definitely a disturbing story.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that when it's on a face-to-face level, when it's someone hitting someone in the face, we're so disgusted by it, which we should be, yet people seem to have less trouble with like a big bank destroying someone's life by an illegal foreclosure or whatever other practice is. It's like that, you know, these people probably get up and have a hurt face the next day, whereas people's lives are destroyed and we're like, well, it's business as usual. That's
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, but I should note, in all fairness, there have been cases where people have been sucker punched in this way and they've died.
So I should stop?
Yes. It's not
sorry.
fun and games anymore, is it, Lee? But you do make a good point, because I mean, what Wall Street has done, what the big banks have done, that is a real trend, right? They've done it to so many Americans, and so many people have been hurt as a result of that. So to compare that to a few isolated incidents is a really good way to kind of visualize what's going on in society right now.
But that goes to, you know, it's really easy to do a story like this. I mean, the visuals are there, and then to really explain how the banks destroy people's lives, it's going to take 10, 15, 20 minutes. And I'd be curious to know, from what you know in your data, you know, why it is it's so much easier to tell these easy stories, and, you know, and really the big things that really do affect our lives in this country are really complicated, and those are the ones that are impossible to...
What if they show that punching video, but one person's face says Chase Bank and the other person says homeowner?
That would work!
Well, maybe the reason is because throughout our evolutionary history as a species, getting knocked on the back of the head was an important challenge for staying alive, and our ancestors didn't live in a world of complex financial vehicles and all these bundled mortgage securities, or whatever they're called. So it's a bit abstract. It's like global warming. It happens on a scale, a professional scale, that most people aren't used to, in the same way that climate change happens on a time scale that we're not attuned to. So it doesn't really capture your attention.
And drone bombing, since we're pushing the buttons, since we're pushing the buttons in Las Vegas, you know, we're not feeling the impact of it.
Yeah.
Lots of great points on today's show. I feel like we could talk about this stuff all day long, but unfortunately we got to wrap up today. I want to give you guys a chance to tell the audience more about you. Avi, please tell the audience more about your book. It sounds really good.
Well, Our Political Nature is the first book to reveal the science underlying human political orientation, and also to tell the natural history of these left-right spectrums that run through countries around the world. And I hope that your viewers can check it out on ourpoliticalnature.com. And it makes a perfect Christmas present for people who are interested in politics, but also science.
Definitely.
It's also a science book.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks. Kelly, your show.
Yeah, well, you know, I've got my podcast, Waking from the American Dream, and my SiriusXM show. I think Jay Moore is on next month. And yes, and I got a book deal, so I'm very excited. I'm writing a book for St. Martin Press, Carlin Home Companion. And you can always find me on Twitter. Please come find me on Twitter. We will play hashtag games together.
I have to say, writing a book is very difficult, so you're in for it.
Already, I'm saying no to people I love about things that, you know, I don't want to, because I have to go and write my book.
Yeah, I totally feel you.
And a lot of pictures.
Okay. Big drawings, stick figures.
And Lee, please tell our audience about your comedy.
Hey audience, I have a web series that's connected to the Young Turks called Moment of Clarity. It's twice a week. You can get it at leecamp.net. I also have a podcast. I also have a book and 2 comedy albums out that make actually weirdly terrible Christmas presents. So do not get people those.
Fair enough.
Reverse psychology.
Yeah,
Well done.
yeah.
I like
I'm
that.
trying it.
It's good.
All right, guys. I'm Ana Kasparian. You guys can check me out Monday through Friday on theyoungturks.com from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern time. You like how I had to look down at my paper to make sure that I got the time right? Because we're in, of course, we're Pacific time, and I don't want to mix it up. But anyway, you guys get it. Have an awesome week, and we will see you next week with another episode of The Point.